Continuing Plutarch's Lives, translated by John Dryden, revised by Arthur Hugh Clough. We are in Theseus. I guess this is the third program. Farther yet, designing to enlarge his city, he invited all strangers to come and enjoy equal privileges with the natives. And it is said that the common form, "Come hither, all ye people," was the words that Theseus proclaimed when he thus set up a commonwealth in a manner for all nations. Yet he did not suffer his state by the promiscuous multitude that flowed in to be turned into confusion and be left without any order or degree, but was the first that divided the commonwealth into three distinct ranks: the noblemen, the husbandmen, and artificers. To the nobility he committed the care of religion, the choice of magistrates, the teaching and dispensing of the laws, and the interpretation and direction in all sacred matters. The whole city being, as it were, reduced to an exact equality. The nobles excelling the rest in honor, the husbandmen in profit, and the artificers in number. And that Theseus was the first, who, as Aristotle says, out of an inclination to popular government, parted with the regal power. Homer also seems to testify in his catalogue of the ships, where he gives the name of people to the Athenians only. He also coined money and stamped it with the image of an ox, either in memory of the Marathonian bull, or of Taurus, whom he vanquished, or else to put his people in mind to follow husbandry, and from this coin came the expression so frequent among the Greeks of a thing being worth 10 or 100 oxen. After this, he joined Megara to Attica and erected that famous pillar on the isthmus, which bears an inscription of 2 lines, showing the bounds of the 2 countries that met there. On the east side, the inscription is Peloponnesus there, Ionia here, and on the west side, Peloponnesus here, Ionia there. He also instituted the games in emulation of Hercules, being ambitious that, as the Greeks, by that hero's appointment, celebrated the Olympian Games to the honor of Jupiter, and so by his institution they should celebrate the Isthmian to the honor of Neptune. And remember, Jupiter comes from a word like God the Father, basically, or God of Heaven, For those that were there before observed, dedicated to the Melicerta, were performed privately in the night, and had the form rather of a religious rite than of an open spectacle or public feast. There are some who say that the Isthmian Games were first instituted in memory of Sciron, Theseus thus making expiation for his death upon account of the nearness of kindred between them, Sciron being the son of Cnethus, and Heniaca, the daughter of Pittheus, though others write that Cenes not Sciron, was their son, and that to his honor, and not to the others, these games were ordained by Theseus. At the same time, he made an agreement with the Corinthians that they should allow those who come from Athens to the celebration of the Isthmian Games as much space of honor before the rest to behold the spectacle in, as the sail of the ship that brought them thither, stretched to its full extent, could cover. So Hellanicus and Andrew of Halicarnassus have established. Concerning his voyage into the Euxine Sea, Philochorus and some others write that he made it with Hercules, offering him his service in the war against the Amazons, and had Antiope given him for the reward of his valor. But the greater number of whom are Pherecydes, Hellanicus, and Herodorus write that he made this voyage many years after Hercules, with a navy under his own command, and took the Amazon prisoner. The more probable story, for we do not read that any other of all those that accompanied him in this action took any Amazon prisoner. Bion adds that to take her he had to use deceit and fly away, for the Amazons, he says, being naturally lovers of men, were so far from avoiding Theseus when he touched upon their coasts that they sent him presents to his ship. But he, having invited Antiope, who brought them to come aboard, immediately set sail and carried her away. An author named Metacrates, that wrote the history of Nika in Bithynia, adds that Theseus, having Antiope aboard his vessel, cruised for some time about these coasts, and that there were in the same ship 3 young men of Athens that accompanied him in this voyage, all brothers. Whose names were Euneas, Thoas, and Solon. The last of these fell desperately in love with Antiope, and, escaping the notice of the rest, revealed the secret only to one of his most intimate acquaintances, and employed him to disclose his passion to Antiope. She rejected his pretenses with a very positive denial, yet treated the matter with much gentleness and discretion, and made no complaint to Theseus of anything that had happened. But Solon, the thing being desperate, leaped into a river near the seaside and drowned himself. As soon as Theseus was acquainted with his death and his unhappy love, that was the cause of it, he was extremely distressed, and the height of his grief, an oracle which he had formerly received at Delphi, came into his mind, for he had been commanded by the priestess of Apollo, Pythes, that wherever in a strange land he was most sorrowful and under the greatest afflictions, he should build a city there and leave some of his followers to be governors of the place. For this cause he there founded a city, which he called, from the name of Apollo, Bethopolis, and in honor of the unfortunate youth, he named the river that runs by it Solon. The 2 surviving brothers, and left the 2 surviving brothers entrusted with the care of the government and laws, joining with them Hermas, one of the nobility of Athens, from whom a place in the city is called the house of Hermas, though by an error in the accent it has been taken for the house of Hermes, or Mercury, and the honor that was designed that was designed to the hero transferred to the entity. And one of the things that I'm not sure about the Greek names, because we don't have Greek and we may not have the right spelling, so I'm trying to say some of these things in more of a Greek way. This was the origin and the cause of the Amazonian invasion of Attica, which would seem to have been no slight or womanish enterprise, for it is impossible that they should have placed their camp in the very city and joined battle close by the Phoenix and the hill called Busium, unless, having first conquered the country round about, and had thus, with impunity, advanced to the city, that they made so long a journey by land and passed the Cimmerian Bosphorus, when frozen, as Hellanicus writes, is difficult to be believed, that they encamped all but in the city is certain, and it may be sufficiently confirmed by the names that the places hereabout yet retain, and the graves and monuments of those that fell in the battle. Both armies being in sight, there was a long pause and doubt on each side, which should give the first onset. At last Theseus, being sacrificed to fear in obedience to the command of an oracle he had received, gave them battle, and this happened in the month of Boedromion, in which, to this very day, the Athenians celebrate the feast Boedromia. Cladamus, desirous to be very circumstantial, writes that the left wing of the Amazons moved towards the place which is yet called Amazonium, and the right towards the place which is and the right towards the Pnyx, near Cressa, that with this wing, the Athenians issuing from behind the museum engaged, and that the graves of those that were slain are to be seen in the street that leads to the gate called Pyrrhic, by the chapel of the hero Chalcodon, and that here the Athenians were routed and gave way before the women, as far as to the temple of the Furies, but fresh supplies coming in from the Palladium, Ardetus, and the Lycium, they charged their right wing and beat them back to their tents, in which action a great number of the Amazons were slain. At length, after 4 months, a peace was concluded between them by the mediation of Hippolyta, and for this historian calls the Amazon who Theseus married, and not Antiope, though others write that she was slain with a dart by Malpadia while fighting by Theseus' side, and that the pillar which stands by the temple of Olympian earth was erected to her honor. Nor is it to be wondered at that in events of such antiquity history should be in disorder, for indeed we are also told that those of the Amazons that were wounded were privately sent away by Antiope to Chalcis, where many by her care recovered, but some that died were buried there in the place that is to this time called Amazonium. That this war, however, was ended by a treaty is evident both from the name of the place adjoining to the temple of Theseus called, from the solemn oath taken there, Horcomassium, and from the ancient sacrifice which used to be celebrated to the Amazons the day before the feast of Theseus. The Megarians also show a spot in their city where some Amazons were buried, on the way from the market to a place called Rus, where the building in the shape of a lozenge stands. Could that be, you can represent the sunrises and sunsets through the year by a lozenge. And that will tell you, the exact angles of the lozenge will tell you your latitude. And it is said, likewise, that others of them were slain near Cahonia and buried near the little rivulet formerly called Thermodon, but now Haman, of which an account is given in the life of Demosthenes. It appears further that the passage of the Amazons through Thessaly was not without opposition, for there are yet shown many tombs of them near Scotassa and Canascathala. Now, is it necessary to have these distinctions of, these distinctions of the graves? I mean, identify the graves, but, build monuments for one and, the other. Because aren't we kind of evened out in death? This is as much as is worth telling concerning the Amazons, or the account which the author of the poem called the Side gives of this rising of the Amazons, how Antiope, to revenge herself upon Theseus for refusing her and marrying Phaedra, came down upon the city with her train of Amazons, whom Hercules slew, is manifestly nothing else but a fable and invention. It is true indeed that Theseus married Phaedra, but that was after the death of Antiope, by whom he had a son called Hippolytus, or as Pindar writes, Demophon. The calamities which befell Phaedra and this son, since none of the historians have contradicted the tragic poets that have written of them, we must suppose happened as represented uniformly by them. There are also other traditions of the marriages of Theseus, neither honorable in their occasions nor fortunate in their events, which yet were never represented in the Greek plays, for he is said to have carried off Anaxo, a Trezenian, and having slain Cenis and Kerkon, to have ravished their daughters, and married Peripoea, the mother of Ajax, and then Pherapoea, and then Aope, the daughter of Iphiclus, and further, he is accused of deserting Ariadne, as it's before related. Well, polygamy was fine in the society. You don't have to abandon your women, right? Is as before related, being in love with Agil, the daughter of Panopeus, neither justly nor honorably, and lastly of the rape of Helen, which filled all Attica with the war and blood, and was in the end the occasion of his banishment and death, and will presently be related. Now, so you see that the Bible in the book of Genesis isn't the only place where you have this nonsense where you go to war. Rather than seeking out and punishing the rapist and their accomplice, is whole groups of people. Kill that whole group over there because one guy did something. No. Punish the people who commit the crime. perhaps you can use violence to get through and arrest the person to go get tried. I mean, as the society, as the, on an official basis or something, not saying vigilante. But yeah, Herodotus is of opinion that though there were many famous expeditions undertaken by the bravest men of his time, yet Theseus never joined in any of them. Only once accepted with the Lepitha in their war against the centaurs, but others say that he had accompanied Jason to Colchis and Meleager to the slaying of the Caledonian boar, and that hence it came to be a proverb, not without Theseus, that he himself, however, without aid to anyone, performed aid of anyone, performed many glorious exploits, and that from him began the saying, "He is a second Hercules." He also joined Adrastus in recovering the bodies of those that were slain before Thebes, but not as Euripides in his tragedy says, by force of arms, but by persuasion and mutual agreement and composition. For so the greater part of the historians write. Phidicorus adds further that this was the first treaty that ever was made for the recovering of the bodies of the dead, but in the history of Hercules it is shown that he who first gave leave to his enemies to carry off their slain. The burying places of the most part are yet to be seen in the village called Eleuthera. Those of the commanders at Eleusis, where Theseus allotted them to a place to oblige Adrastus. The story of Euripides in his Suppliants is disproved by Aeschylus in his Eleusinians, where Theseus himself relates the facts as here told. The celebrated friendship between Theseus and Pirithous is said to have been thus. Was Theseus and Pirithous is said to have been thus began the fame of strength and valor of Theseus being spread through Greece. Pirithous was desirous to make a trial and prove of it himself, and to this end seized a herd of oxen which belonged to Theseus, and was driving them away from Marathon. And when the news was brought that Theseus pursued him in arms, he did not fly, but turned back and went to meet him. But as soon as they had viewed one another, each so admired the gracefulness and beauty, he was seized with such respect for the courage of the other that they forgot all thoughts of fighting. And Pirithous, first stretching out his hand to Theseus, bade him to be the judge in this case himself, and promised to submit willingly to any penalty he should impose. But Theseus not only forgave him all, but entreated him to be his friend and brother in arms, and they ratified their friendship by oaths. After this, Pirithous married Didymia and invited Theseus to the wedding, and entreating him to come and see his country and make acquaintance with Lepitha, he had at the same time invited the centaurs to the feast, who, growing hot with wine and beginning to be insolent and wild, and offering violence to the women, the Lepitha took immediate revenge upon them, slaying many of them upon the place, and afterwards, having overcome them in battle, drove the whole race of them out of their country, Theseus all along taking their part and fighting on their side. But Herodotus gives a different relation of these things, that Theseus came not to the assistance of the Lepitha till the war was already begun, and that it was in this journey that he had his first sight of Hercules, having made it his business to find him out at Trachis, where he had chosen to rest himself after all his wanderings and his labors, and that this his interview was honorably performed on each part with an extreme respect and goodwill and admiration of each other. Yet it is more credible, as others write, that there were before frequent interviews between them, and that it was by means of Theseus that Hercules was initiated at Eleusis, and purified before initiation, upon account of several rash actions of his former life. Theseus was now 50 years old, as Heronicus states, when he carried off Helen, who was yet too young to be married. Some writers, to take away this accusation of one of the greatest crimes laid to his charge, say that he did not steal away Helen himself, but that Idas and Lycius and Luncius were the ravishers who brought her to him and committed her to his charge, and that therefore he refused to restore her at the demand of Castor and Pollux are. Indeed, they say her own father, Tyndarus, had sent her to be kept by him, for fear of Anaurophorus, the son of Hippocoon, who would have carried her away by force when she was yet a child. But the most probable account, and that which has most witnesses on its side, is thus: Theseus and Pirithous went both together to Sparta, and having seized the young lady as she was dancing in the temple, Diana Orthia fled away with her. There were presently men sent in arms to pursue, and they followed no further than to Tegea, and Theseus and Pirithous being now out of danger, having passed through Peloponnesus, made an agreement between themselves that he to whom the lot should fall should have Helen to his wife, but should be obliged to assist in procuring another for his friend. The lot fell upon Theseus, who conveyed her to Athena, not being yet marriageable, and delivered her to one of his allies, called Ephidnus, and having sent his mother, Athra, after to take care of her, desired him to keep them so secretly that none might know where they were. Makes sense why the author is, means what it does to us. Which, done, to return the same service to his friend Pirithous, He accompanied him in his journey to Epibrus in order to steal away the king of the Molossians' daughter. The king, his own name being Aedoneus, or Pluto, called his wife Proserpina, and his daughter Cora, and a great dog which he kept, Cerberus, with whom he ordered all that came as suitors to his daughter to fight, and promised her to him that should overcome the beast. But having been informed that the design of Pirithous and his companion was not to court his daughter, but to force her away, he caused them both to be seized, and threw Pirithous to be torn in pieces by his dog, and put Theseus into prison and kept him. And people, if you're going to use oracles, have your ethics before that. Don't use some things to justify things, right? About this time, Menestheus, the son of Petius, grandson of Orneus, and the great-grandson of Erechtheus, the first man that is recorded to have affected popularity and ingratiated himself with the multitude, stirred up and exasperated the most eminent men of the city, who had long borne a secret grudge to Theseus, convincing that he had robbed them of their several little kingdoms and lordships, and having pent them all up in one city, was using them as his subjects and slaves. He put also the meaner people into commotion, telling them that, deluded with a mere dream of liberty, though indeed they were deprived of both that and of their proper homes and religious usages, instead of many good and gracious kings of their own, they had given themselves up to be lorded over by a newcomer and a stranger, whilst he was thus busied in infecting the minds of the citizens. The war that Castor and Pollux brought against Athens came very opportunity to further the sedition that he had been promoting, and some say that by his persuasions was wholly the cause of the invading of the city. A lot of these problems that happen in society is not really, the lower people, you could say, but it's among the elites. It's not all those guys in charge, and see, that wasn't necessary. It's just a replacement of the leadership. At their very first approach, they committed no acts of hostility, but peaceably demanded their sister Helen. But the Athenians, returning, answered that they neither had her there nor knew where she was disposed of. They prepared to assault the city, when Academus, having, by whatever means, found it out, disclosed to them that she was secretly kept at Aphidna, for which reason he was both highly honored during his life by Castor and Pollux and the Lacedaemonians, when often in after times they made incursions into Attica and destroyed all the country round about, and spared the academy for the sake of Academus. But Dicarchus writes that there were two Arcadians in the army of Castor and Pollux, the one called Academus and the other